Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. This time we'll be covering the 10th episode, Hail to the Chief, or as it's known in the Japanese original, the Renewal of Chief Bookum. Man, we're already 1/10 of the way done with this anime series. Isn't that something? Man, the time really does pass faster when you're having fun making a video series. This episode is another one of those early episodes of that copy ability, as it focuses mainly on Chief Bookums. These episodes often get a bad rap, but let's wait for a final judgment and let's dive into that plot, shall we? The episode opens to a shot of Cappy Town as Chief Bookums is directing the traffic in the streets. At least he pretends to direct traffic, as there's only two people in the whole town that have cars. Indeed, it really does seem like a waste of time. Heck, even the Cappies notice it. In the Japanese version, they point out the absurdity of directing traffic where there isn't any. The English dub is slightly different, as they comment on how boring directing traffic must be, especially when there's no traffic in the streets. But they also add that Chief Bookums is reliable enough for the job. Unfortunately, due to the lack of any actual traffic, Chief Bookums gets so bored he even starts to sleep on the job. Which, can you really blame him? When you have next to nothing to do but stand and hold flags for hours on end, it does tend to make one bored and even a little bit sleepy. Even more unfortunate is that him going asleep is just so happens to be when the only two people with cars are driving down streets in just the right intersection where he happens to be posted. Those, of course, being Deity Neskergoon in the Royal Tank and the mayor and his wife in his old 1920 era's car. Now, really, the pair should have been able to see each other, considering how there aren't really any tall buildings to block their line of sight. The expected happens as both vehicles collide, leaving a small dent in both of the vehicles, which either that is one of the weakest tanks in the world, which would explain future fate of the machine in many episodes, or it's some extremely strong 1920s era car. Seriously, those things are really flimsy if you actually research them. Perhaps it's, just for a gag. Weirdly, the Japanese original only has damage indicated on the mayor's car, which makes more sense considering the two vehicles involved. Likely, this was an airbrush change, but I don't know why they would change that. It's very odd. The Japanese version also had a brief scene of Gus and Gengu trying to warn the pair driving, but the English dub cut this short scene. Also cut was a short scene where Chief Bookums is practicing his flag signaling, and it's zoomed out before the scene cuts to his red flag, before he goes to sleep. Probably both of these scenes were cut to save time, but it is always a loss when a non-offensive scene gets cut. Even offensive scenes are usually best not to be cut. Obviously, they didn't see the signal, Gengu. If they had, they wouldn't have crashed into each other, and this whole episode's basic plot would have never even happened. Also, 15 miles an hour, a cheetah can run faster than that. Really, they should have seen each other, even if the signal wasn't there, especially considering the open layout of this specific section of Cappytown. Justifiably bamboozled by the crash, the mayor gets out and angrily scolds the king for his poor driving. A crowd gathers as Deity recovers from his crash, looking like he's out of his mind on drugs more than actually being in a car crash. He refutes the mayor, with Escargoon saying the king always has the right of way on the road. The two are stuck in a deadlock. The mayor asks Chief Bookums who is at fault. In the Japanese version, the king tries to convince Bookums to arrest the mayor for the collision, whereas in the English dub, he just tells him not to cut him any slack just because he's royalty, and legislates us execute the law. Quite more mature of him in the English dub. Unfortunately, in either version, the requests don't get an answer, because to all those present's shock, yes, Chief Bookums is asleep. The crowd gather around the slumbering chief. Mayor states the obvious, and Chief Bookums awakes suddenly and ignorantly says they're caused an accident by standing in the road, which is a true, if poorly timed, statement. The mayor then tells him that he was sleeping on the job, and everyone looks at him, annoyed, as he nervously tries to de-escalate the situation like a good cop does, by laughing nervously. Everyone is annoyed, especially the king, who groans in petulant rage. In the Japanese version, he calls him a good-for-nothing. After the intro, we then cut to Castle Deity, where Escargoon is seen repairing Deity's tank, while the king paces back and forth.
Bungling Bookum, that crash was his fault!
Well, actually, you kind of caused the accident, as you could have easily seen the mayor's car approaching, considering the geography. Why is it that people always blame the cops for their own mistakes? You ever notice that? It seems like a recurring trend that just keeps occurring in our society over and over and over again. Escargoon comments on how Deity could have very easily have been hurt, and the only reason he wasn't was because of the king's natural airbag-sized belly, kind of like Billy the Fridge. In the English dub, then has Deity say he needs a tougher on crime police chief. Ooh, again, get another George W. Bush reference. He also smacks Escargoon over the head because of the insult. In the Japanese original, he instead says that he wants to do administrative reforms. While this may seem to be but a simple line change, it's actually a reference to a Japanese political event. You see, in the early part of the year 2000, the then Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi had planned a controversial, massive structural reform for the Japanese government. Honestly, considering that most non-Japanese people wouldn't get the reference, the change was understandable, and the more Clinton/George Bush tough on crime reference is more understandable, and plus it really carries the same message. Back to the plot, Deity plans to fire Chief Bookums, spread all across the town, with Chef Kawasaki and Tuggle both commenting on the situation. Again, we see another change between the Japanese original and the English dub. In the Japanese original, Chef Kawasaki's segment is first, and then Tuggle the store owner's segment is second. For unknown reasons, the English dub flips this, and the Tuggle section is first, and then Chef Kawasaki's segment is second. This change is beyond me. I don't know why it was changed. No amount of research could really solve this answer. It's probably just one of those things changed for the sake of changing. Regardless of the exact order of those first two, we also see Gus and Gengu comment on how the police are being abolished, though Chef Kawasaki is more concerned about his loss of donut sales. really get it. It's a joke. It's funny. You know, there's more important things to the abolishment of police than whether or not the local restaurant sells enough donuts. Tough, shocked and upset at the news, runs to his friends and Kirby to tell them the horrific events occurring. Spikehead says that Chief Bookums fell asleep on the job, but Tough counters that he's too important to be on traffic patrol, let alone be fired. They then ask why, to which Tough answers that Chief Bookums was once part of the Rough Ranger Squad.
The Rough Ranger Squad is the toughest fighting force on the planet. My buddies and me got stuck in some real jams on the battlefield, but we never gave up. It's like us Rangers always say, Tough, always.
Referred to as the Ranger Corps in the Japanese original, Tiff, being the skeptical, science-minded one, bursts the mood, saying that it simply cannot be true, that according to her, from reading a book on the history of the Cappies, that the chief's story makes no sense. Again, there are a few changes between the Japanese original and the English dub. Firstly, the title of the book, The History of Poo-Poo Land, was airbrushed out. I don't know why they didn't just change the name from Poo-Poo Land to Dreamland, because that is what Dreamland is called in Japanese. But alright. Also, the line is changed. In the Japanese original, Tiff claims that there hasn't been a war in a long time, which is a reasonable statement if you know anything about archaeology. In contrast, the English dub has her say that there was never any wars, which is a bit far-fetched to me, and especially when you consider just the length of time that will require. Are you telling me in the history of Cappies there's never any conflict? Sure, pal. Tough says the book is wrong, which leads to Tiff suggesting that maybe Chief Bookums lied to her younger brother. Tough vehemently denies this, saying Rough Rangers never lie. Tiff tries to say something, but is cut off. Tough says no war veteran deserves the pink slip, which is a true statement, and he asks his friends if they want to help him ensure that Chief Bookums is not fired. To which Kirby, Spikehead, Iroh, and Honey all agree to, and they decide to devise a plan while Tiff just sits beneath a tree, looking at them skeptically. We then cut to the police department, where a small crowd is gathered outside, looking into the windows. They all mutter to themselves about the situation. Chief Bookums walks to the front room, and they try to hide, only for him to sigh and retreat back to the back room / bedroom with his wife talking to him. The interaction between Chief Bookums and his wife, Buttercup, are actually really sweet. I love this line she says of encouragement, because it's just so sweet and, like, actually makes them feel like they're actually in a relationship.
For the axe to fall.
You're still Cappy Town's finest to me.
Thanks.
And it really fleshes out these tertiary characters for what that's worth. Chief Bookums' telephone rings. Answering it, he comes as swift as possible to the person who called him. And we see a farmer's sheep have escaped from their cage. There is another slight change here between the Japanese original and the English dub. The Japanese original has the generic shepherd Cappy claim that someone broke the fence. The English dub changes this to him saying he has no idea how they broke out. This is an actual improvement in the English dub, I mean, really, how would he know that someone broke the gate and that it wasn't just some random accident? And it does kind of make the mystery for the characters last a little longer, though we as the viewers know that Tuff's responsible. And it really does just improve the story overall. Unfortunately, Chief Bookums makes this horrible pun.
Somehow, it's a mess. I'll have him in sheep shape in no time.
Now, that is a crime worth being fired over. He then proceeds to capture the sheep with ease and a net, and some help from the shepherd. After fixing the fence and returning the sheep to where they belong, the shepherd thanks Chief Bookums, lifting the chief's confidence up as well as his spirit. Tuff and the gang are happy at their success and intend to now go on to step 2 of their devilish plans. We then cut to Chef Kawasaki's restaurant. Inside, we see a generic Cappy lady ask for a glass of water. Going to the faucet, Kawasaki tries to turn it on, only to encounter a slight kitchen problem.
Oh?
As you can see, a spout of flames engulfs his head. Being a PG Kids show, we don't see what would actually happen, but it's still pretty funny. Another Cappy asks about his meal of hotcakes. What the bloody heck is a hotcake? We call them pancakes around here, you Yankee Doodle dandy. Still flustered from the whole getting fire in the face, turning the stove on, we see Chef Kawasaki utterly bamboozled as a burst of water comes out, sending the presumably iron pan flying in the sky and hitting the already burned and slightly dazed Kawasaki, getting nearly knocked out and lying on the floor, clearly in tremendous pain. He then calls Chief Bookums over, who investigates the issue. As you can see, it has been revealed that someone switched the gas and water pipes. Okay, just a small little nitpick I have to say is that that's not actually how it works. The gas isn't on fire in the pipes. It only sets on fire when it reaches the part of the stove that sets it on fire. I mean, if there were fire in the pipes and the pipes were filled with flammable gas, well, this would happen. Bookums then explains it was a pyroaquariac. What the heck is that? Someone who sets fires to aquariums seems like a federal crime. Chef Kawasaki then does another horrible pun. That is a crime wave indeed, Chef. Thank you so much for that pun. Why? Kirby almost exposes the group as he starts dancing for an unknown reason and almost drops a wrench to expose them before Tuff shuts him up and the group go to their next target, Curio's Museum, where we see the group of kids running from the crime scene with paint buckets in tow. Once again, Kirby trips over, leaving a telltale clue that almost exposed them. Luckily, Tuff caught that and cleans it up. Man, Kirby is just really incompetent. They really shouldn't have gotten that baby involved. Curio proceeds to call Bookums about the unknown raiders, who had painted over everything in the store, even himself, in his sleep. Quite the heavy sleeper he must be. He points out the insanity of getting rid of the police at this time, which, let's be honest, getting rid of the police is almost always poorly timed. Chief Bookums then proceeds to rub Curio's face without his permission. Bookums points out how odd it is for the hoodlums to use removable paint for their crimes, especially if they are vandals. Curio then explains to Bookums, not really caring about his observation, that they must stop the criminals, as they have no respect for the history of Cappy Town's history. Huh. You know, I wonder if there's anyone else like that in the real world. Probably nothing. Once again, Chief Bookums promises to help the embittered citizen. Curio's phone rings. Answering it, he gives it to the chief, as it's for him. We then cut to Tuggle's store, where a bunch of mysterious signs appeared, claiming everything was 100% free, and much like Black Friday, there's a huge surge of people who just take stuff off the shelves in what we can only assume was a very violent and swift manner. He explains this all to the chief and says he supports the chief against the king's decision. Then Bookham states that the past day has had him have more crime than the past 10 years. Man, this town sounds like a wonderful place to live. I mean, think about it. Less than 3 crimes in 10 years. That's just amazing. We then get a montage of 3 Cappies all calling for the chief's help. One has had a bike stolen, one having an emergency, and another with a robber breaking into their house. Chief Bookums, being the responsible, well-meaning policeman, runs, struggling to help all these people, but managing to pull it off with relative ease. Meanwhile, Tough and the gang all hide in the tree, giggling at the level of success their plan has had, with a panning view of the entire town calling out for Chief Bookums' help. The celebrations are cut short, however, when Tiff from the ground calls them out on what some would call childish behaviors they have been doing. Also, Iro makes this odd statement that seems to be too obvious that didn't really need to be said.
The more mischief we make, the more we help the police.
Tiff says that she thinks they're behind the recent crime spike that has been occurring in Cappy Town. He denies the accusation, but Tiff calls him out. Before this conversation can escalate, we see Deity arriving at the town, and so the conversation ends as everyone turns to see the arriving despot. Escargoon reads to the Cappy crowd present the king's royal decree that Chief Bookums is out of a job because he's dismantling the police department. The citizens, having experiencing a major crime wave, are understandably visibly upset at the proposition. Chief Bookham says that he's okay with being fired, but asks that they spare the police force, especially with a huge wave in crime. Deity and Escargoon are left speechless as Tough and his friends cheer the chief on. However, Kirby notices an insect hive in the tree, and due to Tough's negative influence over the past day, decides to grab the nest, breaking it, sending it and him falling into Escargoon's head. And Kirby ends up in the back seat. Escargoon is a bit confused as to what's going on. I mean, we all would be if we suddenly had a dark object covering our eyes. But then he realizes the situation he's in.
What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Actually, they're only called bees in the English dub. They're referred to as wasps in the Japanese original. Really, their designs are so anime that it doesn't really matter whether they're bees or wasps, as they can be either or, considering how they're designed. Understandably terrified, Escargoon slams on the gas, accidentally bumping into the tree, causing Tough to fall into Deity's tank. After a short respite, the bees emerge and start attacking the king and Escargoon, who try to drive away. Tough is, of course, accidentally dragged along, as so is Kirby, and the boy screams for help. Tiff calls out for her brother, and Chief Bookums goes to save the poor kid. And Kirby, needing speed, he commandeers the mayor's car. Man, the mayor can't seem to catch a break when it comes to his car. I mean, he just repaired that old thing. Also, this scene is for some reason one of the last scenes changed in the episode. You see, the scene where it shows Chief Bookums starting up the car and chasing after Tough and Kirby are sped up in the English dub to better fit within 4Kit's time restraints. As he is getting ready, Tiff and the other kids join in, despite his protests. Tiff says that Tough and Kirby are in the car, and despite Chief Bookums saying it goes against all the regulations, he lets them come along. The group speeds off after the king, who is still being chased by the swarm. Which, man, they are very determined. Escargoon has some oof! Oh, man! Some really huge bee stings that just look so bloody painful. Like, ow. I feel bad for you, man, even if you're the bad guy. Deity, not stung yet, orders Escargoon to step on it to escape the swarm, to which Escargoon says he can't see where he's going, as both Kirby and Tough sit there in the back mortified and too scared to do anything. Escargoon, due to the stings impacting his vision, drives into a forest and over extremely rough terrain. Deity, tired of Escargoon's driving, pushes him out of the car and takes the wheel. Unfortunately, the mechanism appears to be broken, and the group pulls some major truck action. And the tank goes into a river, and Deity falls out. Despite being a penguin, he seems not to be the best swimmer. Soon afterward, Kirby falls out, though due to his baby-like innocence and puffball-like body, he doesn't really have as much pain as Deity or Escargoon did. Because, man, Escargoon face-palmed into that rock. Tough, now on his own, tries to drive the out-of-control tank. Why he doesn't just jump out is a question, but then again, the plot wouldn't really work if he did so. Meanwhile, as Bookums drives after him, the children admit to their crimes, and they did them so that Chief Bookums could keep his job. No idea why Tiff apologizes, though. She had no involvement. Iroh explains that they wanted to make everyone view Bookums as the heroic rough ranger that you think he was. Bookums, a bit taken aback by this, and the group noticed Kirby, who had been left behind earlier. They ask what Tough is, and Kirby points in the direction of a literal volcano. In the Japanese version, it's called Kilauea, which is an actual volcano in Hawaii. In the English dub, it's referred to as the Buma Duma volcano. A rather odd. Maybe they didn't want to pull a Bionicle and offend the Maori. Chief points out how it's unstable. Tough is still gripping onto the wheel, trying his best to reach the brakes, but is unable to do so due to his height.
Tough will be okay.
Oh, sure. It's just a volcano.
Wow, Iroh, you really seem a bit ambivalent to your friend's survival. The tank bumps into a rock near the volcano's edge, causing Tough to fall to his death. The end. Nah, I'm just joking. The group quickly arrive after him. Tiff looks all in the tank, but doesn't see him. Investigating the volcano, she sees Tough has fallen onto a ledge near the lava. Now, surely either the fall or the proximity to the lava would have killed him, or at the very least burned him, but he survives in response to the group's call. Chief Bookums decides to get a rope so he can climb down and save Tough. Tiff tries to stop him and is about to call the warp stall, but Meta Knight stops her, saying that Tough really believes in Bookums, and if Kirby helps, that would really kind of break his spirit. She points out Tough believes that are not true, but to which he counters,
But Tough thinks
That the chief has the spirit of a rough ranger. Let's give the chief a chance to prove it.
which is actually a good idea, making the two confront their misbeliefs and misunderstandings. Getting a rope, Chief Bookums slowly climbs down to save the poor boy. He succeeds a little bit until he loses his footing and almost falls into the lava. However, thanks to Meta Knight's instructions, the kids pull on the rope, and all that he gets is his butt being slightly burned from literally touching the lava, indicating that Cappies are stronger than they look in the games. After recovering his grip, he climbs up and gets to Tough, and he still continues to play along as being a rough ranger. He then orders the group up there to pull him up, as about the same time a crowd of citizens had arrived, come to view what is going on, apparently. Oh, and ladylike faints, which, is realistic. If your own child falls into a lava, you will faint a little bit. But also proves how worthless she is. Like, can't you pull on the rope, man? Unfortunately, due to being distracted by Ladylike's fainting, the crowd is about to begin pulling the pair up, but a burst of lava hits the rope, breaking it. Tiff asks if they have another rope, to which Ira says they don't, but Chief does not give up. Tying Tough to his back, he starts climbing the steep ledge out of the volcano. Sensing the serious tone, Tough apologizes to the chief and comes clean about all his rotten things he's done around town. Chief Bookums, sensing the times now, then admits his own misdeeds. In the Japanese version, he says that he wasn't a Rough Rider, instead that his brother was one. In the English dub, he just says that he was rejected. I prefer the Japanese line, as it gives more lore to the series, even if we never see his brother. The English dub, I don't know, it just feels flatter to me, and really acts as if just flat. Also, Tiff's change in dialogue is exactly why this was changed. If she hadn't said that there had never been any wars, then it would have been reasonable to expect Chief Bookums' brother to be involved in one. But no, they didn't do that. The heart-to-heart's cut short, however, as Chief's back gives out. Meta Knight, sensing the imminent danger, and that the pair had come to terms, gives Tiff the okay to call the Warp Star for Kirby. Bookums laments not being able to be a ranger and letting Tough down. Tough says it's okay, and the pair laugh until Chief Bookums begins to lose grip, and the pair begin falling down. But luckily, Kirby's warp star arrives just in time, and he saves the day, probably to make up for the lack of an ability in this episode. The crowd congratulate the police chief, especially his wife, in another line of dialogue that is just so wholesome that it just needs to be listened to. Like, listen to this. Oh gosh, it's just so wholesome. I feel like my teeth are gonna fall out. Deity spoils the mood, however, and arrives. Wait a second, wasn't his car just already on the side of the crowd? How did he roll up in his car? Did he walk all the way up there with Escargoon, get in the car, drive back, and then drive back again? I mean, that seems kind of weird for a king to do. Maybe he just wanted to be grand. It does fit his characteristic to want to be all show-offy. And then he comes with a piece of paper, likely signed by AOC, that gives him the right to disband the police. The townsfolk, however, are having none of it, and Deity presses the issue, despite Escargoon's advice not to. Tiff then orders Kirby to inhale the dictatorial document. To which Kirby does, and then spits it back out, all in shreds, which implies that he has teeth, which is just kind of creepy. Not taking no for an answer, Deity pulls out his cannon and aims it right at the crowd. Preparing to attack, he pushes the button. However, instead of a cannonball, there's a familiar thing that just pops out. That weird wasp nest. Is this why they were chasing him the whole time? How to get in there? Whatever, it's cartoon logic. Who cares? Chief Bookums, seizing the opportunity, sicks the bees on the two buffoons to quote-unquote arrest them, and they drive off as the bees sting them repeatedly. You know, that's actually a genius idea. Maybe next time in Port Holand, Oregon, when some Antifa thugs like Jeff Holiday start showing up to harass people, the people can just chuck live wasps and beehives at them. That'd be really great. The crowd laugh at the king's misfortune, and the episode ends with a shot of Kirby jumping for joy. Now that we've gone over the plot, let's go over the themes, my thoughts, the positives, negatives, my criticisms, and the overall consensus I have for this episode. Now, this episode has a theme that is quite rare, especially nowadays. That being a depiction of a cop in a manner that's actually positive. Indeed, nowadays, and even back then, most depictions of cops were negative. They were either fat, bumbling morons or absolute sociopathic scum. Which is ironic because most of the cops' critics out there are either one of those things, or both. Also, just to clarify, Chief Bookums is depicted in a nuanced way. I mean, he's an honest person, but he's not perfect. And he always tries his best. This feeds into another one of the positives of the episode. That being that this episode really fleshes out Bookums and his wife as background characters that are worth caring about. This is one of the positives of the anime that will be addressed again in this series and in my final review of the entire series as a whole. But there are episodes that move these secondary characters from being forgettable one-offs to actually develop characters. And it's magnificent. It is amazing how this anime makes me care about these characters. Also, they use Tuff's annoying nature as a way to further the episode's narrative, and in a positive manner, as opposed to other episodes where he's usually just a detriment. That is so impressive, and it's quite interesting when anime uses a weakness as a strength. Also, the use of the warp star was slightly clever, and really made up for the lack of the abilities in the episode. And, however, there are some issues with this episode, and let's cover them now. And when I say issues, these aren't like some of the other episodes I've covered where they're genuinely annoying, like Takori or Fofa. More like parts of the episode that could very easily be considered boring to many people. I mean, there's no actual monster or ability, and as such, most people will consider it one of those forgettable episodes, and that's really problematic, especially for the 10th episode in a series. And it's always unfortunate when that occurs, as the 10th episode is often a landmark in a series. However, I have to say, it may be slightly boring to some people, but I just loved the way they used dialogue. I mean, aside from like one or two corny puns, it was really, really good dialogue. Also, any episode without a speaking role for Takori, it's just amazing. I mean, some people have even completely forgotten to review this episode, despite claiming they are fans of the anime and are interested in reviewing the whole series. You know who you are. It's rather telling and shameful, you drunk. Anyway, while these ability-less early episodes do get a bad rap, and while one in particular is terrible, and we'll get to that, this episode, in my overall opinion, is a pretty decent one. Not as good as, say, Unreality TV or Kirby's Dual Role, but it's still well worth watching, especially if you are interested in Chief Bookham's character or really like this anime. I'm the Dark Master, and thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider joining me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective.